Deep within the rekindled heart of Khazad-dûm, a new kind of soldier was being forged. Darth Vader, the Iron Lord of Moria, had proven the effectiveness of his Storm Goblin legions. Their disciplined shield walls had shattered a dwarven charge and annihilated an army from Mordor. But they were a hammer, a tool of overwhelming direct force. The hunt for the One Ring required a scalpel. In the vast echoing space of the 21st Hall, Vader stood before a select group of goblins. These were not the largest or the strongest. They were the runts, the survivors, the ones who had endured in the brutal anarchy of goblin society through cunning, speed, and a capacity for cruelty that was exceptional even for their kind. He had tasked Gothmog with selecting 100 of the most viciously intelligent specimens, and these were the result. They trembled before him, their yellow eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a sycophantic desire to please. They knew this silent black giant was the source of all power in their world, a being who could grant them status or snuff out their lives with a thought. "You have been chosen," Vader's amplified voice boomed, the sound seeming to press down on them from the vaulted ceilings. "You have survived because you are predators. You know how to track, how to hide, how to kill from the shadows. I will now hone these crude instincts into a weapon." His training regimen was a thing of calculated, brutal efficiency. He did not care for their strength. He cared for their senses and their obedience. He starved them, forcing them to hunt the blind, slithering creatures in the deepest caverns. He pitted them against each other in lightless tunnels, where only the ones with the sharpest hearing and cruelest cunning would survive. He taught them the meaning of stealth, of patience, of the single silent killing blow. But their true transformation came from the Force. Vader was no teacher of the light, no master seeking to awaken a student's potential. He was a Dark Lord, and he used the Force as a tool of domination, a brand to sear his will upon their lesser minds. He gathered the survivors, a hardened cadre of 50, and reached out with his power. He did not grant them true sensitivity to the Force. That was a gift they were unworthy of. Instead, he brutally attuned their minds to two specific frequencies in the cosmic symphony. The first was the cold, commanding pressure of his own will, allowing him to issue silent commands and feel their terror from leagues away. The second was the malevolent, screaming vortex of the One Ring. He plunged their minds into a vision of its pure, corrupting essence. Most of them shrieked and writhed on the stone floor, their simple minds cracking under the psychic strain. But a few, the ones whose own petty malice resonated with that of the ring, endured. They rose, shaking, their eyes burning with a new, hungry light. They could now feel the ring, not as a Jedi would, but as a bloodhound smells a scent, a distant, irresistible pull of ultimate evil. These were his hounds. He armed them not with the heavy plate and pikes of his legions, but with black, hardened leather armor, short, sharp-edged blades, and powerful black-feathered crossbows. They were a new unit, a force of infiltrators and assassins. They were the Iron Eyes of Moria. "The weapon you hunt is carried by a halfling," Vader instructed them, showing them a psychic image of Frodo, an image he had torn from the minds of Saruman's Uruks. "You will not engage him, you will not harm him, you will find his trail, you will shadow him, you will report his every movement. The prize belongs to me, and me alone. Any who forget this will pray for a swift death." He led them to the west gate of Moria, which now stood open to the polluted vale of the Dimril Dale. He unleashed them into the world, a silent pack of 50 dark hunters, their senses now unnaturally sharp, their wills bound to his own, their souls forever tainted by the echo of the ring's evil. They melted into the shadows of the mountains, their mission clear and absolute: find the ring-bearer and lead their master to his prize. The hunt had begun in earnest. The journey through the bleak, rock-strewn landscape of the Emin Muul had been a nightmare of sharp stones and choking dust. Now, in the hidden, overgrown land of Ithilien, Frodo and Sam found a brief, fragile respite. The air was warmer here, scented with wild herbs and flowers, a remnant of Gondor's lost beauty. But the peace was an illusion. The shadow of Mordor lay heavy on this land, a constant, oppressive dread that emanated from the Black Mountains to the east. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow that moved, was a potential threat, a sign of orcs or worse. Frodo felt the weight of the ring on its chain, a cold, heavy burden that seemed to grow more ponderous with every step closer to the Black Land. It was a constant, malicious whisper against his soul, draining his strength, feeding his despair. But in the last few days, a new sensation had begun to creep into the edges of his perception. The familiar, fiery dread of Sauron was still there, a constant pressure from the east, but now there was something else. A new presence, from the west, from the direction of the distant misty mountains. It was a cold, silent, and deeply unnerving watchfulness. It felt like the gaze of a machine, a thing of pure analytical purpose, utterly devoid of the chaotic, hateful rage of Mordor. Samwise Gamgee, ever practical, felt it as a simple, persistent chill. "There's a coldness in the air that's got nothing to do with the weather, Mr. Frodo," he'd mutter, his hand resting on the hilt of his small sword. "Makes the hairs on my arms stand up, and it ain't orc mischief." It was Gollum, however, who was truly terrified. His senses, honed by 500 years of living on the edge of survival, were attuned to the subtle powers of the world. He knew the feeling of the Eye of Mordor. It was a hot, angry pressure that made him want to grovel and hide. But this new feeling was worse. It was a cold, silent hiss in the dark corners of his mind. It felt like the hunter that makes no sound, the predator that watches from a branch, its eyes unblinking, its patience absolute. "They're watching us," he would whisper to himself, his great, pale eyes wide with a new and specific paranoia. Not just the yellow face. No, precious. Something else. Something cold. Cold as the fish in the deep, deep pools. It wants the precious. It wants us. He would scamper up rock faces, his gnarled form a silhouette against the sky, sniffing the air, his head cocked. He could not see them. He could not hear them. But he could feel them. A silent, disciplined presence that moved through the shadows with a purpose that was terrifyingly familiar to his own obsessive nature. Frodo, his own senses heightened and twisted by the ring, began to feel it too. The ring on his chest seemed to react to this new presence. It would sometimes grow colder, its whispers becoming more urgent, as if it were aware of a new potential master. It was no longer a simple conflict between the will of its bearer and the will of its creator. A third party had entered the silent spiritual struggle. One evening, as they huddled in a cold camp, a strange sound drifted on the wind. It was a brief, sharp, metallic thwack, followed by the choked gurgle of a dying orc. Gollum flattened himself to the ground, hissing in terror. Frodo and Sam drew their small blades, their hearts pounding. They waited, but no orc horn blew, no triumphant shouts followed. There was only silence. The next morning, as they crept forward, they found the source. A small orc scouting party from Minas Morgul lay dead in a clearing, but they had not been killed in a brawl. One lay with a single black-feathered crossbow bolt in its eye. Another had its throat cut from behind, a single clean, efficient wound. They had been ambushed, exterminated with a professional, silent lethality. "What did this, Sam?" Frodo whispered, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. "It wasn't rangers. Their work is clean, but not like this. This is..." "Whatever it was, it's hunting orcs," Sam replied, trying to find a sliver of hope in the grim scene. "And that's a good thing, isn't it?" But Frodo was not so sure. He looked at the disciplined, tactical nature of the killing. This was not the work of a random beast or a rival orc tribe. This was the work of skilled, patient hunters. And he had a terrible, sinking feeling that the orcs were not their true quarry. They were just the competition. Captain Faramir of Gondor, son of Denethor, was a man who knew the shadows of Ithilien better than any other. He had led his rangers in a secret, thankless war against the encroachments of Mordor for years. He knew the look of an orc track, the feel of the air when a Nazgul passed overhead, the silence that preceded an ambush. The land and its evils were a book he had read 1,000 times. But in the last week, a new chapter had been written, in a language he did not understand. It began with reports from his forward scouts. Patrols of orcs from the Morgul Vale, which had been pushing deeper into Ithilien, were found annihilated. These were not the signs of a skirmish with his own men. The scenes of the slaughters were strange, unsettling. He went to investigate one himself. In a grove of ancient, overgrown olive trees, he found the bodies of 24 orcs. His experienced eyes read the story of the battle, and it made no sense. There were no signs of a pitched battle. The orcs had been killed with a brutal, tactical precision that was utterly alien. "Look, my lord," his lieutenant Madril said, pointing to a body. "A bolt, but not of our make. The fletching is black, the head a simple, sharpened piece of iron, crude but effective." Faramir knelt and examined the bolt. It was goblin make, he guessed from the crude craftsmanship. But goblins did not fight like this. They were a chaotic swarm, not disciplined archers who could fell an entire patrol from the shadows. He examined another body. The orc's throat had been cut from behind. A single, deep, powerful slash. No wasted motion. They were ambushed, Faramir murmured, his mind racing. A coordinated attack, from multiple positions. The orcs never even had time to form a line. This was the work of trained, disciplined soldiers. But the only such soldiers in this land were his own. A few days later, the riddle became a direct confrontation. One of his patrols, hidden on a high ridge, witnessed a battle in the valley below. A large company of Mordor orcs, perhaps 200 strong, was marching through a narrow defile. Suddenly, from the rocks above, a volley of black-feathered crossbow bolts rained down, scything through the orc ranks. Before the orcs could recover from their confusion, a new force attacked. They were goblins, but they moved with a speed and discipline that was shocking. They were clad in black uniform armor, and they fought not as a mob, but in small, coordinated fire teams. They would strike from the shadows, kill with a brutal efficiency, and then melt back into the rocks before the orcs could mount a proper counterattack. Faramir's men watched, hidden, for nearly an hour as the two forces of darkness tore each other apart. The orcs had the numbers and the brute strength. The black-armored goblins had the tactics, the discipline, and a chilling, silent coordination. In the end, both forces were decimated, the few survivors from each side limping back towards their respective shadows. The ranger patrol returned to Henethanoon, their report throwing Faramir's entire understanding of the war into chaos. Goblins from the misty mountains? Faramir mused, standing by the waterfall that concealed his secret refuge. Fighting orcs from Mordor. Here, in Ithilien. It makes no sense. They are both creatures of the one enemy. It would seem, my lord, Madril said gravely, that there may be more than one enemy. Faramir's mind, already burdened with the defense of his homeland and the failing strength of his father, was now presented with an impossible new variable. A third power was operating in his lands, a power that was hostile to Mordor, but whose methods were just as ruthless, just as dark. Were they a potential ally? A new, even more dangerous foe? He had no answers. He only knew that his shadow war had just gained a new, unknown, and terrifyingly efficient player. The forests of Ithilien, once the battleground between Gondor and Mordor, between light and shadow, had now become a hunting ground for a third, colder darkness that had no place in the songs or lore of his people. The reports filtering back to Mordor were a litany of confusion, failure, and a new, unfamiliar strain of fear. Orc patrols vanishing without a trace, legions from Dol Guldur being annihilated at the gates of a goblin-infested mountain, and now disciplined companies of black-armored goblins actively hunting and slaughtering Sauron's forces in the very shadow of the Fel-Duath. Sauron's great eye, from the pinnacle of Barad-dûr, burned with a cold, black rage. His grand design, the inexorable, continent-spanning machine of conquest he had been building for 1,000 years, was being disrupted by this single infuriating anomaly. The Iron Lord of Moria was not just a rival, he was an infection, his influence spreading beyond his mountain kingdom, challenging Sauron's dominion in his own backyard. This could not be tolerated. The Dark Lord's will, a thing of immense crushing power, surged forth and sought out his greatest servant. In the dead city of Minas Morgul, where a sickly corpse light emanated from the twisted towers, the Witch King of Angmar felt the summons. He had been rehoused in a new physical form, his power restored after his humiliating defeat at Weathertop. But his spirit was not the same. It was no longer just a vessel of his master's will, it was now tainted with a new, personal emotion, the burning, venomous hatred born of utter humiliation. He remembered the being of light, the Star-Fallen, who had shattered his blade, but that memory was a simple, straightforward desire for vengeance. The memory of the Iron Lord was something far more complex. He remembered the feeling of the Force grip on his very soul, the cold, analytical cruelty that had sought to unmake him, the terrifying power that was a darkness different from, and in some ways more profound than his own. He appeared before his master in the highest chamber of the Dark Tower, a vortex of shadow kneeling before a great fiery eye. "My patrols are being hunted." Sauron's will boomed in his mind, a sound of grinding consonants. "My armies are challenged by slaves and runts who have been given a new, arrogant purpose. This Iron Lord seeks to steal my prize from under my very nose. He believes he can challenge the throne of the world." The Witch King felt his master's rage, and it fed his own. "You have been given a new form. You have been given new strength," Sauron continued. "Your mandate is now twofold. The ring is your primary objective. Find the halfling. Bring him to me. But the hunt is now a war. You will sweep the lands of Ithilien clean. You will find these black-armored insects. You will find their master, the Iron Lord. If he dares to show his face, you will crush them, you will exterminate them, you will remind them that there is only one true darkness in this world. A surge of power flowed from Sauron into his servant. The Witch King felt his own dark energies swell, his connection to the world of shadow strengthening. He was being given a new measure of his master's authority, a new depth of power for the task ahead. "It will be done, my lord," the Witch King's voice hissed, a sound of dry, rustling hate. He departed from Barad-dûr, his purpose clear, his heart, if he still had one, filled with a renewed, vicious resolve. The hunt for the ring was no longer a simple pursuit. It was a race against the pathetic, fleeing hope of the free peoples, and a race against this new, arrogant shadow from the west. He gathered the 9. Their hunt would be relentless. They would sweep across Ithilien, their shrieks a promise of death. They would be the hammer that would crush the spiders in the web. And the Witch King himself had a personal vow. He would find this Iron Lord. He did not know how, but he would find a way to inflict pain on a being who seemed to be beyond it. He would find a weapon, a spell, a curse, that could penetrate that black armor and touch the soul within. He would repay the agony he had felt in the Iron Lord's grip 1,000-fold. The war for the ring was now, for him, a personal vendetta. The Iron Eyes moved through the dying forests of Ithilien like wraiths. They did not march like the storm goblins. They flowed through the landscape, their black leather armor blending with the shadows, their movements silent, their senses unnaturally sharp. They were a pack of disciplined, intelligent predators, and they were closing in on their prey. For weeks they had followed a cold trail, a faint, psychic scent of the ring's passage. But now, as they drew closer to the borders of Mordor, the scent was becoming a stench, a powerful, irresistible beacon that pulled at the sliver of darkness Vader had branded into their minds. The pack was led by a goblin named Grishnak, not to be confused with the Mordor orc of the same name. This Grishnak was small, even for a goblin, but his eyes held a cunning and a cruelty that had impressed Vader. He had survived the training, he had endured the psychic branding, and he had emerged as the alpha of the Iron Eyes. He and his pack came upon the scene of a recent skirmish. It was the aftermath of a confrontation between Faramir's rangers and an orc patrol. Grishnak's unnaturally sharp senses sorted through the information. He smelled the familiar foul scent of Mordor orcs. He smelled the clean, hated scent of men. But beneath it all, he smelled something else. A faint, earthy, and utterly unfamiliar scent. The scent of halfling. He knelt, his long, claw-like fingers brushing over a small footprint in the mud, a print far too small for a man or an orc. The prize, a cold voice hissed in the back of his mind. It was the echo of his master's will. The trail was now hot. They followed it with a renewed, feverish purpose. It led them through the woods, past the sites of ranger ambushes, ever eastward. They moved with a stealth that was terrifying. They would climb into the high, withered branches of the trees, moving through the canopy like black skeletal apes, their eyes scanning the ground below. Finally, they found them. From a high, concealed ridge, Grishnak looked down. Below, in a small hidden dell, a great waterfall crashed into a deep, churning pool, and behind the waterfall he could just make out the entrance to a cave. The scent of the halflings, and the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of the ring, was coming from that cave. He could feel the ring's power, a warm, inviting throb in his mind. The temptation to simply charge in, to take the prize for himself, was immense. The goblin nature in him screamed to take it, to become the new master. But the fear of Vader was stronger. He remembered the training. He remembered the feeling of the Iron Lord's mind, a cold, crushing weight that could snap his own like a dry twig. He remembered the absolute, final command. You will not engage. You will report. The Iron Eyes were not a mindless horde. They were a tool, a sensory organ for their master. Grishnak held up a clenched fist, a silent command he had learned in Vader's brutal drills. His pack froze, melting into the rocks and shadows of the ridge, becoming utterly invisible. They would not attack. They would watch. They would wait. Grishnak dispatched 2 of his swiftest runners. They would not use horns or loud calls. They would run day and night, a silent, relentless journey back through the lands, back towards the misty mountains, back to the black fortress of Moria. They carried no written message. The message was in their minds, a simple telepathic burst of information that their master would feel the moment they came within range. The prey is cornered. On the ridge overlooking the forbidden pool, the Iron Eyes began their silent vigil. They watched as the men of Gondor brought the two halflings into the cave. They watched as the sun set, and the waterfall became a silver curtain under the light of the moon. They were a pack of silent, patient wolves, their gazes fixed on the den where the lamb was hiding, waiting for the great black lion to arrive. The descent into the dell of Henneth Annwn was, for Frodo and Sam, a moment of unexpected peace. They were captives, yes, but their captors were men of a grim but noble bearing, and the hidden cave behind the waterfall was a sanctuary of surprising beauty. For the first time in weeks, they were safe from the immediate threat of orcs and the oppressive, watchful eye of Mordor. But Gollum did not feel safe. For him, this was the worst trap of all. He was a creature of darkness and shadow, and this place was filled with a gentle, growing light. The men of Gondor looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust that made his skin crawl, but his true terror came from the outside. As he was dragged, bound and hissing, into the cave, he could feel it. The cold, silent, watchful presence that had been haunting him since they entered Ithilien was no longer a distant feeling. It was close. It was on the ridges above, a ring of silent, patient hunters whose minds were fixed on one thing, his precious. He could feel them as a cold pressure in his skull, a faint echo of the cold master they served. It was a will that was utterly alien to him. Sauron, the yellow face, was a power he understood. It was a hot, angry, demanding power, a master who wanted his ring back. Gollum had served that master, had felt his lash, and knew the shape of his evil. This new master was different. It was a cold, empty, and utterly dominant will. It did not seem to hate him. It did not seem to care about him at all. It simply wanted the ring, and it was watching him, the ring's last true owner, with a dispassionate, analytical gaze, as if he were an insect in a jar. That night, as Frodo and Sam slept, and Faramir brooded over his impossible choice, Gollum huddled in the darkest corner of the cave, his mind a swirling vortex of fear and cunning. He was caught, utterly and completely caught. The path to the precious is blocked, the Gollum part of his mind whimpered. Nasty men have us, and the cold things are watching from the rocks. They watch, they wait. We're trapped, precious, trapped. A new, colder, more calculating thought slithered through his consciousness. It was the voice of Sméagol, but a Sméagol twisted by centuries of cunning survival. Two masters, yes, two masters. The thought hissed. The hot master wants the precious back. The cold master wants the precious for himself. Both will kill us to get it, squeeze us and snuff us out. He began to weigh his options, his long, pale fingers twitching as he plotted. He could stick with the hobbits. They were soft, they were kind, and they were carrying the precious towards the fire, towards its doom, an unthinkable, blasphemous thought. But they were also his best chance of getting close to it again, if he could just wait for the right moment. But the cold things were outside. They were hunters. They would not let the hobbits get away. If he stayed with the hobbits, he would have to face them, and he felt with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the cold master would not be as easy to trick as the fat hobbit or the noble men. What were his other options? He could betray the hobbits to the men, tell them the truth about his secret path, about Shelob, but the men would likely kill him, and they might take the precious for themselves, for the White City. No, that wouldn't do. A new, terrifying idea surfaced. The cold master is strong, the voice in his head whispered. Stronger than the wraiths, stronger than the men. He sent his hunters, and they are silent. They are clever, almost as clever as us. Precious. What if we served the cold master? The thought was a jolt. He could lead the cold things to the hobbits. He could give them the precious. The cold master might reward him. He might let him have the precious back, just for a little while. Let him hold it. But he immediately recoiled from the idea. He could feel the nature of the cold master's will. It was not a will that shared. It was a will that took. It was a will that commanded, and then discarded. To serve the cold master would be to become a slave, a tool, just like the black-armored goblins. It would be a different kind of cage, but a cage nonetheless. And in that cage he would never ever have his precious again. His mind settled on a single, desperate, and treacherous path. The original path. He had to get the hobbits away from the men. He had to get them away from the cold things. He had to get them onto his secret path, up the winding stairs of Cirith Ungol. He had to lead them to her. Shelob. She was his secret weapon, his ace in the hole. She would deal with the hobbits. She would sting them and wrap them up, And then he, Smeagol, could sneak in and take the precious for himself. Shelob didn't want the ring. She only wanted food. It was the perfect plan. And perhaps, he thought with a flicker of mad cunning, she would be a match for the cold things too. Let the hunters come. Let them follow him into her lair. Let them face the great dark spider in her web. While they fought, while they died, he would slip away, with his precious. A low, gurgling chuckle escaped his thin lips. The choice was made. He would not serve a new master. He would not abandon his plan. He would double down on his treachery. He would lead them all into the spider's parlor. It was the only way. The Witch King of Angmar swept over the blighted fields of Ithilien, a shadow of death on the back of a shrieking reptilian beast. He was hunting. His spectral senses, amplified by his master's will, were searching for the faint, pure scent of the halfling's soul, a beacon in the growing darkness. But his hunt was being frustrated. A new scent polluted the air, a cold, disciplined presence that felt like a discordant note in a symphony of evil. The scent of the Iron Lord's servants. He had encountered their handiwork, the slaughtered orc patrols, the strange black-feathered bolts. Now, he would deal with the source. His fell beast let out a piercing cry as its keen reptilian eyes spotted movement in a rocky ravine below. It was not the slow, furtive movement of hobbits. It was the swift, coordinated advance of a dozen black-clad figures, a hunting pack of the Iron Eyes. The Witch King felt a surge of cold, venomous rage. These were the insects that dared to hunt in his master's lands. He would make an example of them. He spurred his mount, and the fell beast folded its leathery wings and dove, a silent, hurtling shadow of death. He expected the goblins below to scatter in mindless terror at his approach. He expected their screams to be a pleasing tribute to his power. The Iron Eyes did not scatter. Grishnak, the pack leader, saw the descending shadow. His mind, branded by Vader's will, did not collapse into primal fear. It registered a threat, a high-priority target, and it initiated a tactical protocol. He let out a sharp, guttural bark, not a cry of fear, but a command. The Iron Eyes responded instantly. They did not run. They dove for cover, melting into the rocks of the ravine. 6 of them rolled onto their backs, their heavy crossbows raised to the sky, a coordinated anti-air position. The other 6 disappeared into prepared positions, behind boulders and in hidden crevices, their own crossbows aimed at the ravine walls. It was a classic L-shaped ambush. They were baiting the aerial threat into a kill zone. The Witch King, his mind fixed on the kill, did not notice the tactical shift until it was too late. He swooped into the ravine, his fell beast's talons extended, ready to rip and tear. The crossbows fired. A volley of a dozen heavy, iron-tipped bolts slammed into the fell beast. The bolts were not magical. They did not carry the light of the Eldar. But they were fired with disciplined precision, aimed not at the Nazgul but at its mount. They punched through the creature's tough, leathery hide, tearing muscle and sinew. The fell beast shrieked, a sound of pure pain and surprise. Its dive faltered. It tried to pull up, its massive wings beating furiously, but one of the bolts had pierced the membrane of its left wing, tearing a great hole. Its flight became a clumsy, lurching struggle. The Witch King, enraged, urged the beast on, but it was wounded, its movements now slow and predictable. This was the opening the second team of Iron Eyes had been waiting for. From their hidden positions on the sides of the ravine, they unleashed a second, cross-cutting volley. These were not simple bolts. They were attached to thin, strong lines of gut and wire, tipped with cruel grappling hooks. The grappling bolts struck the fell beast's legs and remaining wing. The lines pulled taut, and the great creature, already wounded and struggling, was snared. It was tethered to the rocks, trapped in a web of goblin cunning. It thrashed and roared, but it could not break free. The Witch King was incandescent with fury. He, the Lord of the Nazgul, was being brought to earth by goblins. Goblins! He leaped from his trapped mount, his Morgul blade in his hand, his aura of terror washing through the ravine. He would slaughter these insects himself. But the Iron Eyes had no intention of engaging a ringwraith in close combat. That was not their mission. Their mission was to test, to wound, to report. Grishnak gave another barked command. Retreat. The goblins did not wait. They fired one last, parting volley at the struggling fell beast, and then they vanished, melting back into the warren of rocks and caves from which they had come, their discipline absolute even in withdrawal. The Witch King was left alone in the ravine, his mount hopelessly entangled, shrieking and bleeding on the rocks. He could not pursue them. He let out a shriek of pure, frustrated hatred that echoed through the mountains. He had not been defeated, but he had been outthought. He had been tactically bested by goblins. He was forced to abandon his mount, slaying the crippled beast with a single, merciful strike of his sword. He was now on foot, his pride wounded, his fury stoked to a white-hot pitch. He sent a psychic scream of a report back to his master. The Iron Lord's servants were not mere orcs or goblins. They were disciplined, they were tactical, they were a genuine threat. In Mordor, Sauron received the report, and his estimation of his rival grew once more. This was not a war against a brutish warlord. This was a war against a mind. The sun was setting, painting the waterfall of Henethanoon in hues of orange and gold. It was a scene of deceptive peace. Inside the hidden cave, the tension was a thick, palpable thing. Faramir, captain of Gondor, stood before Frodo Baggins, his face a mask of grim, conflicted duty. He had learned the truth. He had learned of the fellowship, of the quest, of the great burden that the small hobbit carried. He now held the fate of the world in his hands, and the weight of the decision was crushing him. His heart, the heart of a good and noble man, told him to let the hobbit go, to aid him in his desperate quest. But his duty, his oath to his father and to his city, screamed at him to take the ring. "It is a gift," he had murmured, his eyes fixed on the simple gold band that seemed to absorb the light of the torches. "A gift to the foes of Mordor, to use it against the enemy. The horn of Gondor would be sounded in the White Tower, and we would have a king once more." It was into this moment of profound personal crisis that the outside world intruded. A scout, his face pale and his breathing ragged, burst into the main chamber. "Captain Faramir," he gasped. "The pool! Goblins!" Faramir's head snapped up, his personal turmoil instantly replaced by a commander's sharp focus. "What goblins? From the mountains?" "No, my lord," the scout stammered. "Black armor. Disciplined. The same kind that have been hunting the orcs. A company of them, at least 100 strong, is descending on the dell from the north. They move like a silent black river." Before Faramir could even process this new threat, another scout ran in from a different tunnel. "Orcs, Captain. A large company from the Morgul Pass is approaching from the east. They have found us." The cave, which had been a sanctuary, had just become a tomb. Faramir was trapped. His small company of rangers was about to be caught in a pincer movement between two different but equally terrible armies of darkness. His mind raced, cycling through the impossible tactical realities. He was a master of guerrilla warfare, of ambushes and lightning raids, but this was a siege he could not possibly win. And at the center of it all was the hobbit, and the ring. Faramir realized the horrifying truth. They were not here for him. They were not here to capture his hidden outpost. They were here for the ring. The two great warring shadows of the world had finally converged on this one, small secret place. His decision was made in an instant. The temptation to take the ring, to use its power to save his men and his city, was immense. But he was a man of greater quality than his brother. He looked at Frodo's small, terrified face, and he saw not a weapon but a soul burdened beyond all measure. To take the ring would be to fail not just the world, but his own honor. "I do not think we will have the good fortune to see the White Tower again," Faramir said softly to Frodo, his voice filled with a new, grim resolve. "But we will not fail you." He turned to his men. His voice, now stripped of all doubt, rang with a captain's clear, cold authority. "The enemy is at our door. 2 enemies. We are rangers of Gondor. We have held this land against the shadow for all our lives. We will hold it for one more night." He began to issue orders with a rapid, desperate clarity. "Madril, take 10 men and seal the western passage. Use rockfalls, whatever you must. Slow them down. Anborn, your archers to the high crevices. You will fire on my command and not before. We will let them enter the dell. We will let them see each other, and we will use their hatred for each other as our greatest weapon." It was a desperate, almost suicidal plan, to turn his sanctuary into a 3-way kill box. He then turned to his most trusted guards. "You two," he commanded, "take the halflings and the creature. Take them to the deepest, most hidden passage. Seal the entrance behind you. You will not emerge, no matter what you hear. Your lives are sworn to their protection. Go, now." Frodo and Sam were hurried away, their hearts filled with a mixture of terror and a profound, reluctant admiration for the captain of Gondor. Faramir drew his own sword. its bright steel a defiant light in the gloom of the cave. He was a man of Gondor. He was a shield against the darkness, and though a new second darkness had appeared, his duty remained unchanged. He would stand, he would fight, and if he must, he would die, buying the ring-bearer a few more precious moments of time. In the vast forge-lit throne room of Khazad-dûm, Darth Vader stood in silent meditation. He was a pillar of blackness in a world of fire and shadow. His consciousness extended, reaching across the leagues of Middle-earth. He had felt the skirmishes of his iron eyes, their small victories and tactical retreats. He had felt the rage of the Nazgûl, a familiar, impotent fury. He was a patient predator. His plan was proceeding flawlessly. His hounds were on the trail, their discipline holding, their purpose clear. Then, he felt it. A change in the psychic currents. A report, not in words but in a single clear telepathic burst from his pack leader Grishnak, 1,000 miles away. A vision of a waterfall, a hidden cave, and the overwhelming intoxicating scent of the ring, now stationary, cornered. The prey was trapped. Vader's patience, a thing of cold, calculated logic, came to an end. The time for shadowing, for hunting, was over. The time for the kill had arrived. He had considered sending a legion. 1,000 of his storm goblins, disciplined and heavily armed, could have easily overwhelmed the Gondorian rangers and seized the prize. But that was not his way. This was a prize of ultimate power. Its acquisition was a personal matter. To delegate such a task would be to show weakness, to admit that he required the aid of lesser beings to achieve his goals. He had learned from his master Palpatine that the most important victories must be secured by one's own hand. There could be no witnesses to his claiming of the ring, no ambitious lieutenants, no loose ends. He would go himself. He turned to Gothmog, who groveled at the foot of his dais. "You are in command," Vader's voice boomed, the words an investiture of immense, terrifying responsibility. "Continue the drills. Continue the forging. Maintain the watch on the elves and the dwarves. My orders stand. Failure will be met with a consequence you cannot imagine." Gothmog, trembling, bowed his head so low his snout touched the stone. "Yes, my lord. It will be done, my lord." Vader strode from the hall, his black cape sweeping behind him. He did not take a retinue. He did not take supplies. He was a self-contained engine of conquest. His armor was his fortress. The Force was his guide. And his lightsaber was the only tool he would need. He moved through the dark tunnels of his new kingdom. The rhythmic, mechanical breathing of his respirator, a sound that sent his goblin soldiers scrambling to their knees as he passed. He emerged from the east gate, a solitary black figure against the pale gray sky. He did not need a map. The pull of the ring was a perfect, unerring compass in his mind, and the silent telepathic signals from his iron eyes gave him a precise real-time location. He began his journey south. He did not run. He did not ride. He moved with a steady, relentless, ground-eating stride, a pace he could maintain for days without rest. He was a tireless, dark pilgrim on a journey to claim his holy relic. He crossed the plains. He forded the rivers. He passed through the haunted, dead marshes, his armored boots sinking into the mud but never faltering. He was a being of pure, unbending purpose, a black arrow aimed at the heart of Ithilien. As he traveled, his mind was a cold, clear engine of strategic planning. He considered the possibilities. The men of Gondor who held the ring-bearer were an obstacle, but a minor one. He would dispatch them with a cold efficiency. The orcs of Mordor were an irrelevance, a pest to be swept aside. The true challenge would be the ring itself. He remembered Gandalf's warning, the Lady of the Wood's visions. They believed the ring would corrupt him. They believed its will would overwhelm his own. They were fools. He had been born in the light. He had been raised by the Jedi, the galaxy's great hypocrites of self-denial. He had felt the pull of the dark side, had seen its promise of power, and he had made a choice. He had chosen strength. He had chosen order. He had chosen to embrace the very emotions the Jedi feared. The ring's temptations, power, control, the imposition of one's will upon the universe were not temptations to him. They were his own stated goals. The ring would not need to corrupt him. It would only need to serve him. Its will and his will were already aligned. It was not a master to be feared, but a tool to be claimed. He felt no doubt. He felt no fear. He felt only the cold, exhilarating certainty of his own destiny. He had been cast into this primitive, chaotic world for a reason. He had been led to this ring for a reason. It was the key. the key to his own personal apotheosis, the key to forging a new true empire, a galaxy of perfect, unshakable order. A black phantom of purpose, the Iron Lord of Moria moved south, his patience at an end, his hand ready to close around the prize that would remake the world. The cave of Henneth-Anun, which for so long had been a place of quiet refuge for the rangers of Ithilien, had become a pressure cooker. Faramir, his face a grim mask of resolve, moved through the torchlit chambers, his commands sharp and precise. Every man knew his duty. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and trapped, but they were sons of Gondor. They would not break. The first attack came from the east. A company of Mordor orcs, their bodies painted with the symbol of the Red Eye, swarmed into the dell. They were a chaotic, howling mob, their movements driven by a frenzied, bloodthirsty rage. They had found the trail of the ring-bearer, and they could smell their prize. Faramir's archers, hidden in the crevices around the waterfall, unleashed their first volley. Gray-feathered arrows rained down, each one finding its mark. The orcs fell, but more surged forward, their numbers a seemingly endless tide. "Hold your positions," Faramir yelled, his own sword drawn. "Let them come to the water, they will break upon the rocks." But his strategy, designed to counter a single foe, was immediately rendered obsolete. From the north, a new force emerged. They moved not with the chaotic rush of the orcs, but with a silent, terrifying discipline. It was a phalanx of Vader's storm goblins, 200 strong, their black armor seeming to drink the twilight. They marched in a perfect ordered formation, their shields locked, their pikes leveled. They were a block of black iron, a moving wall of death. They did not charge. They advanced with a steady, rhythmic tramp, utterly ignoring the chaotic battle already raging between the orcs and the rangers. Their objective was clear and singular: the cave. The orcs, seeing this new disciplined force, hesitated. Their brutish minds, driven by simple hate, were momentarily confused. Were these new creatures friend or foe? The storm goblins answered the question for them. As they marched, a rank of crossbow goblins behind the shield wall raised their weapons and fired a single devastating volley. It was not aimed at the rangers hidden in the rocks. It was aimed directly at the flank of the Mordor orcs. The orcs shrieked as the volley tore through them. This was not a rescue. This was a second attack. Faramir and his men could only watch in stunned disbelief from their hiding places. The two armies of darkness had met at their doorstep, and they were tearing each other apart. The orcs, enraged and betrayed, turned their fury on the storm goblins. The chaotic, swirling melee of the orcs crashed against the unyielding, disciplined shield wall of the goblins. It was a battle of pure, animalistic savagery against cold, fear-driven tactics. The dell before the waterfall became a charnel house. The sounds of battle were a horrifying symphony, the guttural roars of the orcs, the disciplined, barked commands of the goblin captains, the shriek of steel on steel, and the wet, ugly sound of blades finding flesh. For a moment it seemed that the rangers might be saved by the infighting of their enemies, but the moment did not last. The commanders of both forces, the orc chieftain and the goblin captain, knew their true objective. They were willing to sacrifice their own troops to the other army, as long as they could secure the prize. Small squads from both sides began to break away from the main melee, attempting to bypass the fighting and make a rush for the cave entrance behind the waterfall. "Archers," Faramir roared. "Target any that approach the falls, let none pass." The rangers' arrows now joined the fray, picking off the flanking squads from both the orcs and the goblins. The battle had become a chaotic, three-sided free-for-all. Faramir was no longer a defender. He was a survivor, trying to hold his position in the heart of a hurricane of his own making. The pressure was immense. His men were fighting with the desperate courage of the doomed, but they were a tiny handful against two armies. The bodies were piling up. The orcs were using their own dead as bridges to cross the stream. The goblins were forming smaller tactical shield walls and advancing relentlessly, step by bloody step towards the falls. Faramir knew they could not hold. They were buying time. Minutes. Seconds. He looked back into the dark, sealed passage where he had sent the hobbits. He prayed to the valor, to any power that might be listening, that their sacrifice would be enough, that the ring-bearer would find a way to escape this tomb, a tomb that he, Faramir, had so foolishly led them into. The siege of Henneth-Anun had begun, and it would end in blood. While the bloody, three-sided skirmish raged in the hidden dell of Ithilien, a far greater and more terrible conflict was being unleashed. The Witch King of Angmar, His spirit, still smarting from the tactical humiliation delivered by the Iron Eyes, was now focused on his master's grand strategy. The hunt for the ring-bearer in Ithilien was one part of the plan. The other was the hammer that would crush Gondor's ability to interfere. That hammer was the assault on Osgiliath. The ruined city, once the proud capital of Gondor, had been a contested battleground for centuries. Its broken bridges and shattered domes spanned the great river Anduin, a gray skeletal monument to a fading kingdom. Now, it was to be the anvil upon which the armies of men would be broken. The Witch King did not lead the assault from the front. He directed it from the watchtower of Minas Morgul, his will a tangible, oppressive force that flowed down the valley and into the hearts of his commanders. This was not a raid, this was an invasion. Tens of thousands of Mordor orcs, the main strength of Sauron's army, poured from the Morgul Vale. They were not a disorganized rabble. This was the main host, disciplined in the brutal fashion of Mordor, clad in black steel, their eyes burning with a malevolent, hateful light. They marched under 1,000 banners, each one bearing the symbol of the Red Eye. They swarmed over the river, their great, clumsy siege boats and crude pontoon bridges forming a dark stain on the waters of the Anduin. They crashed against the eastern half of Osgiliath, which was already in their hands, and then surged across the broken bridges towards the western bank, the last bastion of Gondor's defense. Faramir's brother, Boromir, had once held this line with a handful of men. Now, a larger but still inadequate garrison was all that stood in the way of Mordor's wrath. The soldiers of Gondor fought with a desperate, grim courage, their silver and black uniforms a stark contrast to the black and red tide of the enemy. The fighting in the ruined city was brutal, a street-by-street, room-by-room slaughter. The cries of dying men mingled with the guttural roars of the orcs. The beautiful, broken architecture of the old city became a slaughterhouse. But this was only the first wave. The Witch King's plan was a classic pincer movement, designed not just to take the city, but to annihilate its defenders. From the south, a second army appeared. The Haradrim, men from the hot southern lands who had fallen under the shadow of Sauron, marched forth. They came with their great elephantine Mumakil, living siege towers that trampled the ruins and the men who defended them. Their war horns blew a strange alien note that chilled the blood of the Gondorian soldiers. The defenders of Osgiliath were now caught. They were being assaulted from the east by the orcs of Mordor, and from the south by the Haradrim. Their lines began to crumble, their shield walls broke, they were being overwhelmed. The premature assault on Osgiliath was a strategic masterstroke by Sauron and the Witch King. It achieved two primary objectives. First, it drew the full panicked attention of the White City of Minas Tirith. The steward Denethor, his mind already teetering on the edge of madness, would be forced to commit all his available reserves to the hopeless defense of the ruined city, weakening the garrison of Minas Tirith itself. Second, and more importantly for the Shadow War, it cut off any path of retreat from Ithilien. Faramir and his rangers, even if they survived the battle at Henneth Anun, would now find their escape route blocked by a victorious, bloodthirsty army of Mordor. They were completely and utterly cut off. The Witch King had created the perfect trap. The ring-bearer was pinned down in Ithilien. The forces of Gondor were being bled dry in a hopeless battle, and the path was now clear for him to move his own forces, including his fellow Nazgul, into Ithilien to personally oversee the capture of the ring and the extermination of the Iron Lord's meddling servants. The hammer of Mordor had fallen. In the highest chamber of the White Tower of Minas Tirith, the air was cold and still. Pippin, now a guard of the citadel, looked on in horror as the steward of Gondor, Denethor, stared into the dark, polished surface of the Palantir of Anor. The steward's face was pale and drawn, his eyes wide with a mixture of pride and despair as he watched the visions Sauron chose to show him, the endless legions of Mordor, the hopelessness of resistance, the inevitability of the coming darkness. It was into this chamber of gloom that Gandalf the White strode, his staff glowing with a gentle, authoritative light. He had just returned from rallying the outer defenses, and his face was grim. He had seen the fires of Osgiliath. He knew the city was falling. He also knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was more than just a simple military assault. He could feel the will of the Witch King behind it, a strategic mind of great malevolent cunning, and he could feel the other, colder presence in the lands of Ithilien, the silent, watchful will of the Iron Lord. "The enemy is upon us, Denethor," Gandalf said, his voice cutting through the steward's dark reverie. "But the battle you see is a feint. His true gaze is not on Osgiliath. It is on your son. It is on the prize that has fallen into his lap. Gandalf's mind, now amplified by his return from death, saw the trap with a horrifying clarity. Faramir, Frodo, and the ring were at the center of a vortex. The orcs of Morgul, the goblins of Moria, and now the main host at Osgiliath. It was a three-pronged trap, and Faramir was the bait. He feared more than anything what Faramir might do. He knew the captain of Gondor was a man of great quality, far greater than his brother. But the temptation of the ring, especially in a moment of such utter desperation, could break even the strongest will. If Faramir, seeing his city about to fall, decided to bring the ring to Minas Tirith, to use it as a final, desperate weapon, it would mean the end of all things. The ring would be in the one place Sauron expected it, and the war would be lost. Worse, if the Iron Lord Vader managed to cut his way through the chaos and seize the ring from Faramir, the outcome was unthinkable. A new Dark Lord, with a power perhaps even greater than Sauron's, would rise, and the world would trade a fiery tyrant for a cold iron one. "I must ride," Gandalf declared, his decision made in an instant. "Ride where?" Denethor demanded, his eyes still wild from the visions of the Palantir. "The city is besieged. Your place is here." "My place is where the fate of this war is being decided," Gandalf retorted, his voice ringing with the authority of the Valar. "And it is not being decided on the walls of Osgiliath. It is being decided in a hidden cave, in the heart of a good man." He turned and strode from the chamber, his white robes a flash of urgent light. He gave Pippin a single, meaningful look. "Look after him. The madness of the stone is upon him." He descended the 7 levels of the city with a speed that defied his age. He did not gather soldiers. He did not issue commands. This was not a mission for an army. It was a race, a desperate gambit for the soul of the world. He came to the stables, and the great white horse Shadowfax greeted him with a knowing whinny. Gandalf leaped onto his back, a white rider on a steed of living light. "Fly, Shadowfax," he whispered. "Show us the meaning of haste." And they were off. They galloped through the streets of the terrified city, a flash of impossible hope. The guards at the great gate, stunned by the sight of the white rider charging forth alone, threw open the gates for him. He burst from Minas Tirith and onto the Pelennor fields, a single brilliant point of light against the encroaching darkness. He was not riding towards the battle at Osgiliath. He was riding north, into the heart of Ithilien, into the center of the storm. He was racing against the Witch King. He was racing against Darth Vader. He was racing against Faramir's own despair. He was a single white flame, trying to reach the heart of the shadow before it was consumed by one of 2 great, waiting darknesses. The fate of the world rested on the speed of his horse. The forest of Ithilien, once a garden of Gondor, had become a slaughterhouse. The battle that erupted in the dell before Henneth Anun was a chaotic, brutal, and utterly confusing affair. It was not a battle of neat lines and strategic maneuvers. It was a brawl in the dark, a war of all against all. Faramir and his rangers were the first to draw blood, their arrows picking off the charging orcs from the east. But their defensive positions were immediately compromised by the arrival of the storm goblins from the north. The 2 forces of darkness met in the center of the dell, and their ancient instinctual hatred for each other exploded into a frenzy of violence. The Mordor orcs, a chaotic, snarling mob, crashed against the disciplined, silent shield wall of the goblins. The goblins' pikes jabbed, their crossbows fired, but the sheer overwhelming numbers of the orcs began to swamp them, turning their neat formation into a swirling, desperate melee. Faramir seized the opportunity. "Now," he roared to his men, "while they are blind with bloodlust, fire into the press." The rangers' gray-feathered arrows now rained down on both armies, adding to the chaos. They did not distinguish between orc and goblin. Every creature of shadow was their enemy. The forest floor became a treacherous landscape of mud, blood, and bodies. A ranger would be locked in a desperate sword fight with an orc, only to be impaled from behind by a goblin's pike. A storm goblin, its shield raised against an orc's cleaver, would be cut down by a ranger's arrow. There were no front lines. There were no safe positions. There was only a swirling, screaming vortex of death. The sounds of the battle were a horrifying cacophony. The guttural roars of the orcs, the disciplined, barked commands of the goblin captains, the sharp, clear shouts of the rangers, the shriek of steel, the wet thud of axes, and the constant, terrified screams of the dying. The storm goblins, for all their discipline, were at a disadvantage. They were a phalanx army, their strength in their formation. In this chaotic, swirling melee, Their shield wall was broken, and they were forced into individual combat, where the greater size and brute strength of the Mordor orcs often gave them the edge. But the goblins' superior armor and their cold, terrified discipline meant they sold their lives dearly. Faramir fought like a hero of old. His bright blade was a blur of motion, a point of light in the swirling darkness. He moved through the battle, his men rallying to him, forming a small, mobile island of defiance in the chaos. He was trying to push his way back to the falls, to protect the hidden entrance, but for every orc or goblin he cut down, 2 more seemed to take its place. The battle was a stalemate of mutual annihilation. The 3 forces were bleeding each other dry in the muddy, torchlit dell. It was a battle no one could win, a war of attrition that would leave only the dead. But the stalemate was about to be broken. A new player was about to step onto the board, a player whose power would render the struggles of these lesser armies utterly meaningless. A cold, unnatural silence began to fall at the northern edge of the dell, a silence that was more terrifying than the screams of the dying. The fighting in that sector simply stopped. Orcs and goblins alike fell back, a look of new, profound terror on their brutish faces. Into that silence, a single, rhythmic, mechanical sound began to grow louder. Hiss, cock, hawk. Hawk, 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 hawk. A figure of black armor, taller than any man, strode from the shadows of the forest. His red blade was not yet lit, but his presence was a wave of pure, cold domination that washed over the battlefield. The chaos of the fight seemed to falter in his presence, cowed by a will of absolute, unbending iron. Darth Vader had arrived. The arrival of Darth Vader was not like the charge of an army. It was like the coming of a storm. A profound, unnatural silence fell over the northern edge of the battlefield as he emerged from the trees. The frenzied, bloodthirsty rage of the orcs and the terrified, disciplined violence of the goblins were both extinguished by a new, far greater emotion. Absolute, primal terror. He did not seem to see them. He did not acknowledge the battle. He strode through the chaos as if it were a minor, irritating mist, his gaze fixed on one point and one point only, the waterfall, the hidden cave, the source of the ring's power. An orc chieftain, larger than the rest, its courage bolstered by a sheer, stupid bloodlust, roared a challenge and charged at the black figure. Vader did not even break his stride. He did not look at the orc, he simply raised a gauntleted hand. The charging orc was lifted from its feet, its throat constricted, its charge ending in a pathetic, gurgling squeal. Vader made a small, dismissive gesture, and the orc was hurled sideways with bone-shattering force into a tree. The message was clear and universal. He was not here to fight them. They were simply in his way. He continued his relentless, steady walk towards the waterfall. The armies of darkness, both orc and goblin, scrambled to get out of his path, a tide of terror parting before him. Faramir, fighting near the entrance to the falls, saw him coming. He saw the black armor, the flowing cape, the aura of absolute, terrifying authority. He had heard the tales from the dwarves, the whispers from Gandalf. This was him, the Iron Lord, the third power. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was the true threat. The orcs and goblins were a mindless tide. This was the mind that commanded the storm. To me, Faramir roared, his voice ringing with a new, desperate urgency. Form a line at the falls. Let nothing pass. What few rangers were left, bloodied but unbowed, disengaged from their skirmishes and formed a thin, desperate shield wall before the waterfall's entrance, their captain at their center. They were a small, defiant line of silver and gray against the approaching absolute black. Vader stopped. He stood 20 feet from their line, his impassive helmet surveying their pathetic, courageous stand. He could have crushed them all with a thought. He could have thrown them aside like dolls, but there was a cold, cruel part of him, the part that had been a general and a duelist, that respected, in a detached, analytical way, the courage of soldiers facing their own annihilation. He would grant them a warrior's death. The lightsaber ignited. The snap hiss cut through the sounds of the distant battle, and the brilliant crimson blade cast a bloody, dancing light over the scene. You have one opportunity to stand aside. Vader's amplified voice boomed. A final, cold offer of mercy. Gondor does not stand aside, Faramir replied, his own sword held high, its bright steel seeming a pale, fragile thing against the incandescent rage of the lightsaber. We are the wall that stands against the darkness. Your wall is about to be broken, Vader stated. He charged. He did not move with the wild fury of an orc. He moved with the terrifying gliding speed of a master duelist. He was upon them in an instant. The Rangers of Gondor, the finest warriors of their age, were utterly, completely outmatched. Their swords scraped uselessly against his armor. Their spears were severed in mid-thrust. Vader moved through their line not like a man fighting other men, but like a reaper moving through a field of wheat. His lightsaber was a blur of crimson, a tool of perfect, lethal geometry. A parry, a riposte, a disemboweling slash. He did not waste a single motion. He killed without anger, without passion, with only a cold, terrifying efficiency. Faramir met him, their blades clashing. Faramir was a master swordsman, his skill honed by a lifetime of war, but he was fighting a being who could see his every move before he made it. Vader parried Faramir's desperate flurry of attacks with a contemptuous ease, his own blade a constant probing threat. With a flick of his wrist, Vader disarmed the captain of Gondor, sending his sword spinning into the churning pool at the base of the falls. He raised his lightsaber for the final, killing blow. Faramir closed his eyes, his duty done. The blow never landed. A new sound, a high, piercing, unholy shriek tore through the air from above. Vader paused, his head tilting upwards. A great black-winged beast, a fell beast of Mordor, was descending from the sky, a storm of leathery wings and reptilian fury, and on its back was the tall, cloaked figure of the Witch King of Angmar, his great black mace held high, his will a focused point of pure, vengeful hatred. He had seen his prize, and he had come to claim it. The arrival of the Witch King was a cataclysmic shift in the battle. The chaotic, three-sided skirmish between orcs, goblins, and men was instantly rendered irrelevant. The true powers on the board had now revealed themselves. The Witch King's fell beast landed with a ground-shaking thud on the causeway, its screeching cry a wave of pure, soul-crushing terror. The few remaining Rangers of Gondor cried out and fell back, their courage, which had held against Vader's physical assault, finally breaking under the Nazgul's supernatural dread. Vader lowered his lightsaber, his attention now completely focused on this new, greater threat. He recognized the creature, the Wraith. It was the same one whose spirit he had tortured and broken at the gates of his own mountain. But it felt stronger now, its malice deeper, its power amplified. Iron Lord, the Witch King's voice hissed, a sound of tombs and forgotten sorrows. You have trespassed in the lands of my master. You have slaughtered his armies, and you have laid your filthy mechanical hands on a servant of the Nine. I have come to exact a toll for your insolence. He raised his great black mace, a weapon imbued with a magic of breaking and despair. Vader did not reply with words. He replied with action. He raised a hand and a torrent of loose rocks, broken weapons, and the bodies of the fallen were hurled at the Witch King with telekinetic fury. The Witch King simply swept his mace in a defensive arc, and a shield of black, swirling shadow materialized before him, swallowing the debris harmlessly. This was not a physical contest. This was a battle of wills, of sorcery against the Force. Your parlor tricks are useless against a true master of the unseen world, the Witch King taunted, and spurred his mount forward. The fell beast lunged, its great fanged maw snapping. Vader sidestepped with fluid grace, his lightsaber carving a burning crimson line across the creature's flank. The beast shrieked in pain, but the wound was not deep, the creature's hide preternaturally tough. The Witch King swung his mace from atop the beast, a crushing downward blow. Vader met it with his lightsaber, the impact sending a shockwave of black and red energy pulsing through the dell. He was driven back a step, the sheer negative power of the magical weapon jarring him. This was a true challenge. It was then that a third power intervened. Go back to the shadow, a voice boomed, filled with a light and a power that was anathema to them both. You shall not pass. From the forest path a figure emerged, mounted on a great white horse. Gandalf the White, his staff held high, was a beacon of searing incandescent light. The light of his divine power washed over the battlefield, a wave of pure, cleansing energy. The orcs and goblins still fighting in the woods shrieked and recoiled, their dark natures unable to bear the pure, holy radiance. The Witch King, bathed in the wizard's light, let out a piercing, agonized scream. The light was a physical pain to him, burning his spectral form. His fell beast reared in terror, trying to shy away from the blinding, holy fire. Vader too felt the light. It was not a pain in the same way, but it was a profound discomfort. It was a searing, purifying energy that grated against the cold, dark core of his own power. It was the light of the Jedi, amplified 1,000-fold, a light he had thought he had extinguished from the galaxy forever. The battlefield was now a stage for a mythic confrontation. The three great supernatural powers of the age were locked in a triangular standoff. Vader, the avatar of cold, technological, tyrannical order. The Witch King, the champion of hot, chaotic, magical evil. And Gandalf, the servant of the secret fire, the guardian of free will and natural light. The Witch King, his hatred for Gandalf, an ancient and profound thing, momentarily forgot Vader. He turned his terrifying presence on the wizard. "Old fool, your time is over. The age of men is ended." As the two ancient enemies faced each other, their wills clashing, Vader saw his opportunity. The wizard and the wraith were distracted. The path to the cave, to the ring-bearer, was clear. He began to move, a silent shadow detaching himself from the great conflict. But Gandalf, even while holding back the Witch King's power, was aware of all. "You will not have him, shadow from another world," he cried, and with his free hand, he slammed his staff onto the stone causeway. A wall of brilliant white fire erupted from the ground, blocking Vader's path. It was not a normal fire. It was a flame of pure, spiritual energy, and Vader could feel its purifying heat even from a distance. He was trapped. The Witch King was held at bay by Gandalf's primary power. He himself was blocked by Gandalf's wall of fire. The three of them were locked in a perfect stalemate of will and power. A checkmate where no king could move. And in that moment of absolute, world-shaking distraction, with every great eye, every great power, focused on the impossible battle at the waterfall, no one was watching the hobbits. Inside the deepest, most hidden chamber of Heneth-Anun, the sounds of the great battle were a distant, terrifying thunder. Frodo and Sam, guarded by two grim-faced rangers, could only listen in horror, their imaginations painting a picture of the slaughter happening just outside. It was Gollum who truly understood. He could feel it. The precious was calling, and new, great powers were answering. He could feel the hot, demanding presence of the Wraith Lord. He could feel the cold, crushing will of the Iron Master. He could feel the bright, burning light of the White Wizard. All of them, all the great, terrible things were gathered right outside, their wills clashing over his precious. The cave was no longer a sanctuary. It was the eye of the storm, the most dangerous place in all of Middle-earth. And Gollum, in his terror, saw his one, final, desperate chance. "The way is shut," one of the rangers said, his hand on his sword, his ear pressed to the stone wall they had erected. "It was made by those who are dead, and the dead keep it. The way is shut." "Not for us, precious," Gollum whispered to himself, a mad, cunning glint in his wide, pale eyes. "No, not for Sméagol." He knew paths in this cave that the rangers had forgotten. He had explored every crack and crevice in his brief captivity, his small, emaciated form able to squeeze through gaps that a man could not. He looked at the hobbits. The fat one was brave. The master was fading. The ring was growing too strong. He had to get them out. He had to get them to her. It was his only hope. "Master," he hissed, tugging on Frodo's cloak. "There are other ways, dark ways. Sméagol knows the way out. We must go, now, while the big people fight." Frodo, his mind clouded by the growing power of the ring and the terror of the battle, looked at Gollum with a flicker of desperate hope. Sam, however, was suspicious. "What way out? You're a liar and a sneak." "No, not a liar," Gollum insisted, his voice a pathetic whine. "Sméagol wants to help the master. The big people will take the precious. They will. We must save it. We must run." It was Samwise Gamgee, the simple gardener from the Shire, who made the decision that saved the world. He heard the clash of powers outside. He knew that Faramir and his men were dying. He knew that Gandalf was there, fighting some terrible battle. And he knew that the longer they stayed, the more certain it was that the ring would fall into the hands of one of these terrible, powerful beings. Gollum was a treacherous, wretched creature, but right now, he was their only hope. "All right," Sam said, his voice a grim, determined whisper. "Show us the way, but I'll be watching you. One wrong move, and I'll stick you like a pig." While the two guards stood with their backs to them, their full attention on the sounds of the battle. Gollum led the two hobbits to a dark, narrow crack at the back of the chamber, hidden behind a loose flap of rock. It was a sewer drain, a forgotten water channel that led deep into the rock. They slipped away, unnoticed. Outside, the great stalemate held. The three powers, Vader, Gandalf, and the Witch King, were locked in a struggle of pure will. But as the hobbits moved further and further away, the central point of their conflict, the ring itself, began to fade from their immediate senses. The Witch King was the first to realize it. The ring's presence was no longer a burning coal in his perception. It was a distant, fading ember. The prize was gone. With a final, frustrated shriek, he broke the stalemate. His purpose here was lost. He tore his will away from Gandalf's and spurred his fell beast, which had been cowering from the light, into the sky. He would report his failure to his master, and he would begin the hunt anew. Vader felt it too. The pull of the ring was now a faint, receding whisper. He had been so close. He had been distracted by the wizard and the wraith, and the prize had slipped through his fingers. A surge of cold, black fury rose in him, but he suppressed it. Rage was a tool, not an indulgence. The mission had failed. A new strategy was required. He looked at Gandalf, whose white light still burned with a defiant, weary strength. He could fight the wizard now. He could probably win. But to what end? The ring was gone. To kill the wizard here would be a pointless act of passion. Without a word, Vader deactivated his lightsaber. He turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, his legions of storm goblins disengaging from the battle and retreating with a silent, disciplined withdrawal. Gandalf was left alone on the causeway, the last echo of the great conflict fading into the night. The battle was over. It was a stalemate, a draw. Faramir and a handful of his men had survived. The armies of darkness had been bloodied and turned back. But the ring was gone, slipped away in the chaos, now on a dark, secret path known only to a treacherous, corrupted creature. The Shadow War had ended not with a bang, but with a whisper. The hunt was over. The final, desperate, and now completely unguarded race to the fires of Mount Doom had just begun.